Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
A little pebble can create a ripple effect, It doesn't have to be a giant wave or a giant tsunami. We all have that in us. I don't know if you've ever heard this before. You can either choose to live or exist. And I read that shortly after Sawyer died, and I just thought, I can sit here and exist, or I can get up and live. And one thing that his doctor did say to me, he goes, when you wake up every day, Lindsay, I need you to ask yourself, what would he want you to do? He would not want me to just exist. He'd be like, Mom, get out there and live. So that's what I do.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping overwhelmed clients make space for what matters. Join me each episode as we explore ways to live a more proactive, productive life with topics and guests that speak to simplifying self-awareness, systems, and so much more. I understand overwhelm personally as a fellow multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and I believe we need to talk about and embrace the many aspects of grief in our life. Before you continue listening, I need to warn you that today's episode is another very tender one. So please consider this a trigger warning, as our conversation involves my guests' personal experiences with death, specifically the loss of a child. Honestly, it was hard for me to record, and you will hear the tears, which are still not finished, but I believe it's worth it. It's my goal to share real experiences so we can acknowledge and learn about the complexity of grief, how we process grief, and how we heal from it. Today's guest shares a beautiful story of healing through giving back. She describes herself as a mom who has grieved the loss of a child with as much grace, dignity, and optimism one can muster. And I'm looking forward to having you meet her and feel the inspiration I felt when I did. Lindsay's a mom of 4 amazing children, ages 17, 14, 9, and her heavenly baby who passed away unexpectedly over 15 years ago. She's the owner of Tailored Image, a branding and design studio, Naughty Good Bites, a gourmet chocolate company, and the founder of Angels Walk for Wishes, a nonprofit organization. Through her numerous businesses and various volunteer efforts, Lindsay's learned that giving back, lifting others, and making a difference is the only way to move forward. If today's episode speaks to you, I encourage you to listen to some others on grief that are in the podcast collection. There are 2 episodes that feature Katie Russler, 14 and 80, on how we grow through grief and navigating grief through humor, and episode 63 with Sherry Trentini on letting go of the weight of grief. Some other episodes that complement this one in different ways include episode 46 with Jake Doherty on how you can help yourself by helping others, and episode 50 with Tim Ringgold. The episode is on increasing focus and reducing stress with music, but he shares about extreme loss, grief, and how music helped him heal. As always, please know that I not only welcome feedback, I encourage it. Did this episode help you? Give you hope? Did it inspire you to try something? Is there another aspect of grief you'd like me to cover? Please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. Now it's time for Lindsay's story of how giving back helped her and her family heal. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast, Lindsay Taylor. I'm so grateful that you joined me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it.
I'd love it if you would start by telling us a bit about who you are, who you help, and what makes you light up.
Let's see. Well, I'm a wife to my high school sweetheart. I'm a mom of 4. I am the founder of a nonprofit called Angels Walk for Wishes. We're no longer active, but that's a big part of who I am. I'm the owner of Tailored Image, which is a branding studio, as well as the owner of Naughty Good Bites, which is a gourmet chocolate company. So I'm a busy mama, first and foremost. And what lights me up, I have to say, is my family. Absolutely. Like they drive me every single day. So yeah. And I don't think I answered. Who do I help? I think through my multiple businesses, I help a lot of often female entrepreneurs, but even that's through like Tailored Image, but just I'm big on female empowerment. I know it's very much a buzzword, but I'm very much on helping and lifting up other females for sure.
And how we connected is through someone else who feels that same way. So shout out to Emily Aborn. She built this.
Yes.
She's an incredible one for helping lift other females, entrepreneurs, just anyone really, to lift them up. And she connected us. I love so much of what you do. I mean, all you had to do was say chocolate and you had me, but
I had you at chocolate.
you did have me at chocolate. However, your story and the fact that when I say we love to talk about grief here on the podcast, it may sound funny, but we embrace it. We embrace it truly. And I think that your story is one of doing that same thing. And I wanted to highlight it today. So, how we cope with grief and how giving back can change everything. So if you would, to whatever extent you feel comfortable, share a bit about your story and about how you found giving back helped you with your grief.
Yeah. So it was 14 years ago, and my husband and I, we were pregnant with our second child. We had our daughter, and he was born just under 4 weeks early. But by all accounts, he was healthy. He was 8 pounds, 4 ounces at almost 4 weeks early. So you can imagine how big he would have been if he was full term. But he wasn't really considered a preemie. So he actually went home normal time. And it was about 7, 8 days in, he started to become really lethargic. And he wasn't waking to really feed. And he wasn't being aroused really easily. So I called the doctors and said, he's really struggling. And it was really just like overnight almost. I said, all right, bring him in. And my husband came home and I was showering and my husband went to change him. And he said, we are going right now. And I was like, whoa, what just happened? And he said, I don't know, but I think he just had a seizure. And I'm like, oh, all right. So he put him in the car seat and we were just heading right to the ER. When he put him in the car seat on the way out the door, he had another seizure. And so brought him in immediately, called 911. I took him out and we ended up being transported via ambulance. And the EMTs were like, he's going to be fine. Babies, this happens to babies. They'll have seizures. And I'm like, okay. And no lights were on, nothing. We were just cruising, right? And just heading to the hospital. And I still remember where I was on Main Street in downtown Rochester, New Hampshire, when all of a sudden the lights came on and they started flying. And we were maybe just a minute or two from the hospital. And I was like, what is happening? And they started to rush him out, and they rushed me to the, as they were welcoming me, they were going to grab me and head me in to like get all my information. And the EMT says, no, she's going with him. And so I knew something serious was happening. They didn't know. The doctors at the first hospital were like, we don't know what's happening. He was definitely continuing to have seizures. His oxygen levels were dropping. So long story short, we were transported up to Maid Med. That's where they diagnosed him with a suspected metabolic disorder. Now, I'm like, oh, it's about your metabolism. It must be super easy to fix, right? Although now that I'm 44, I can completely disagree with that. It is not so easy to fix. But it was one of those things where we were like, oh, no big deal. And they said, no, what happens is, now this is my understanding. I'm for sure no doctor. Basically, we are all born with thousands of different enzymes. And he was essentially lacking a single enzyme that was essentially poisoning his body. It was something that happened the moment he was conceived. It was something he was lacking. It's not something that happened over time. It was not something. And so they told us that if he were to survive, he would not have a really good quality of life, but that very few kids survived. And I should say, before they even gave us that diagnosis, I remember a doctor saying to me, he's my VIP and there's nothing he can't throw at us that we can't fix. And I was like, okay, so they truly just believed that this wasn't as big of something as, and so they ran all the tests, and that's when they came back with the diagnosis. And it was at that time that we were confronted with the decision of to take him off life support at the time he was on, or to play this out. And so over that, maybe I remember maybe it was a couple hour time frame that we had to make this decision. He started to make the decision for us, and the doctors came back and said, even if you wanted to keep him on life support, it wouldn't keep him alive. Like, that's how much his body was just shutting down. So there wasn't even a choice at that point as to what to do. So within 24 hours of being up at Maine Med, we were having to say goodbye. And it was one of the most mind-blowing, craziest whirlwind roller coasters I have ever been on. And I don't wish it upon anybody. That's our story of our grief, or of our loss. And then the grief, of course, followed.
So to start with, and there's just never words except I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
And it must have been a combination of everything happening so fast and also everything happening in slow motion, and like a big mix. And we talk a lot in terms of grief and loss and things like that, in terms of categories. Like sometimes you have a while to figure out something's happening. Sometimes it's very quick. This is like a mix of that, and 24 hours that you were there.
Yeah, exactly. There's so little time to really comprehend anything. There's so many pieces that even to this, I mean, we're almost 15 years out at this point, and there's still pieces that sit in my brain so vividly. I remember sitting there with the doctor, and when my parents showed up, the doctors were talking with us about what was going to happen. And what felt like 30 minutes between the time my mom came in to the time I sent her out to go get my dad was actually felt like 20 minutes, I swear. And I guess it was like 3 or 4 hours. Like, it was this really crazy length of time. One of the other things that I remember is when my mom went out to get him, the doctor said to me, Lindsay, you don't have to be so strong, because I was very stoic. I was just like, matter of fact. And I was asking okay, we're going to lose him. What can we do can we use his organs? Can we do? And he's just looking at me like, how are you a grieving mom? It was such an out of body experience. You know what I mean? How are you, a mom who's about to lose their child, asking how you can help other people? But I was like, what else do I do? What else am I supposed to do? And so I just looked at him and I said, you just wait. And my dad walked in and I just lost it. That was my permission to just be done.
I think what you're describing there it's such an important point. When we are hurting, when we are in the middle of a loss, grief, it's all connected. There's not a timeline. And by the way, speaking of there's not a timeline, here we are 15 years later.
Yep.
And I'm feeling it with you. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because we need to know. We need to keep treating each other in a way where we understand there's no timeline.
No. And to think, I know how much growth we've done, and it can just be one moment that can take me right back there.
Right, exactly. And so with that, and what you had to do in those moments and the decisions that you have to make, and this is, a description of the stress response that we're in trying to do what we need to do. But the other thing there that you are describing, and I think it's a big part of the overall conversation we wanted to have today, was you were seeking some form of control, some form of purpose, right, in all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was very subconscious, right, at the time, because I didn't understand what that meant, what it was I was seeking. But even on our ride home, I don't remember if it was the ride home specifically, or if it was the ride back up to Maine Medical. But I remember on one of those rides, so it was very shortly after, within a couple days, my husband and I just saying, how can we give back? What can we do? A friend of mine said to me, don't make him just another statistic. Make his life have meaning and have purpose. And I had read so many different things about, there's this one, and I'm going to botch it, but there's on the gravestone, there's that dash, right? Mm-hmm. This date to this date. And that length of time, that dash is the same for anybody, right? But it's the impact you put during that dash that really matters. And I'm like, I want his impact to be real. I want people to keep saying his name. That was so important to me. And I knew that that was the only way that I was going to be able to move forward.
Right. And please say his name.
Sawyer Dean Taylor. So, little story on that. That Sawyer's my maiden name. Middle name was Dean, which was after my uncle, who passed away tragically in a snowmobile accident when I was in 8th grade. So Sawyer Dean Taylor was like paying homage to like my dad, my family, my uncle. That was a hard pill to swallow when he couldn't physically be here to kind of like honor those people. I was like, this was a name I had dreamt of, I had thought of, I had envisioned the future for this, little being. And to think like at first, initially, like now physically, he can't be that.
Right.
But as time went on, you realize like, oh, you can make it even bigger than that.
So Katie Russler has been on our podcast a couple of times talking about grief in a really global kind of way, not just about the loss of our loved ones, but really what it stands for in our lives. And that concept of it's not only losing a person that we are deeply connected to, but we're also losing the hopes and dreams.
Yes.
The anticipation, the expectation of whatever it was, the plans.
Yes.
And you can grieve plans of, we saw this through the pandemic where you were planning to do something special with family or go someplace or travel or whatever it happened to be. And you lost that. That's grief too. And so yours is extremely compounded, right? Multiple layers. So with that, so much of what's going on and just feeling all of this. Let's go back to that moment. I guess it was in the car, that defining moment where you're driving back and you're both just on the same page about wanting to give back. Do you remember what you were thinking in that moment? You were saying you want his life to have purpose, right?
Yeah. And at first it was all about him, right? It was all about for us. At first we're like, how do we keep Sawyer Dean Taylor's name alive? How do we make sure people know that he was our son and that he is our son? And like that was the main purpose through and through. And so we didn't know what that would look like, how that would take shape. But we were certainly looking at different, like if we did a walk to raise money or something, it was going to be, we were putting that walk on for our son, right? And not that honestly, we knew nothing about anybody else. We were like, this is just our story and we want to make sure it's heard. There was a resident doctor who was on our case with Sawyer up at Maine Med, and she made a point. She had been there during the day. He passed that night. And so the next morning when she came in and realized that he was no longer there, we were in a room saying our goodbyes to him and holding him and whatnot. And she came in and she's sobbing and sobbing. And I was like, there was such connection with some of our nurses and doctors. But this particular doctor, she had a hard time. And she said to me, you guys need to talk to somebody. You have to reach out. You have to surround yourself with other people. But she's saying this through tears. And I thought, man, this is really interesting. So we got home. It was a few days later, I got an email from her. And she explained why she was so emotional. It's because she had just lost about a year and a half earlier, her own daughter, newborn. And that was the definer of her and her husband's relationship, particularly, was being able to talk, reach out, seek, your surroundings of other people. And so it's so crazy because to find support for grieving moms was so hard. And I can't even imagine. I'm one of those people that I'll just keep calling people. I'll just keep finding and like following the trail. There are a lot of people, they get the first no and they're going to stop, right? And I can't even imagine those people, what they have to go through if it's not as accessible to them. I just kept digging. All right, well, this person, who else can I call? Nope, this one doesn't have it anymore. Who else can I call? I think it's because there's such a stigma. You don't talk about it, right? Like you don't talk about the loss of a child. We eventually found a place and there were, I don't remember, when we went there were at least, I think 16 of us, maybe a dozen of us that had all within just like a 3 to 4 month period lost a baby. And I was like, wow. And these are only the people that found their way to this support group. Can you imagine the amount of people who didn't find their way? And so it was at that point that we realized that this was so much bigger than Sawyer, that this was about every baby who didn't get a chance to have their names heard, who didn't get a chance to have a voice. Like it was so much bigger than us, right? At first, it's all about us.
And it has to be, I think.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
does, because that is your grief, that is your experience, and it
Yeah.
needs to be honored. But again, this is why I wanted to have this conversation. We need to talk about this. And also the path that you take through this grief, where it does start with you, but then you realize how much bigger, and what you talk about in terms of community and connectivity. That's what we're doing here. It's what we're doing in these support groups. And it's what you continue to do every time you have a conversation with someone else and you share your story.
Yeah. I still to this day will have people who will reach out and be like, I thought of Sawyer today. It's been 15 years, and they'll still say what an impact he had. They never had a loss, but an impact that he had on their life and made them kind of look at life through a different lens or maybe put everything in perspective. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we need a moment here. And so, as with, at least I try, with each of the conversations that we have here, these are the tough things in our lives that come to us and come through us that we get through. And it's not even so much that we get through, like, I mean, we do talk about being on the other side of something, but I think it's more like on the other side of understanding of something, of acceptance, that it becomes a thread in our lives, right?
Hmm.
And so with that, there is also hope.
Oh, yeah.
There's also love and beauty, and that's part of your story. So it's time for us to shift gears into how you continued with that, understanding it was so much bigger than him, and what you did, what that looked like in terms of giving back.
Once we had our support group and it kind of decided that, yeah, I reached out to some of those people who I really connected with. Another one was this, ironically, this woman who I was setting up, just another really quick little story, setting up at a craft fair. And right behind me, this was just in, my son died in September. This was in December. So just a few short months later. And I'm setting up kind of back to back with this other table of these two women. They had a newborn and my mom was with me and she knew it would be hard. And I was like, I saw her, this beautiful little baby, and I was like, wow. And so we got chatting and we had shared our story and I said, can I hold her? And they're like, absolutely. Or maybe they asked if I wanted to, I don't remember. And so I was holding her and they shared their story that the reason why they had her, they had just adopted her and they had lost their son just the March prior. And so I became super close with these guys as well, these two women. And it was, it's everything happens for a reason. So they became part of this micro support group, right? And then as well as people from my actual support group. And so I reached out to them and I was like, any of you guys want to give back, want to do a walk? And they were like, absolutely. So we started brainstorming. There were 4 families initially, ended up being 5 families. And we created this event called Angels Walk for Wishes, and it was to benefit the Make-A-Wish Foundation of New Hampshire. And our goal was to give wishes to children because we couldn't do the same for our own. And so it was about just raising funds that they could use to help other local children have their wishes come true. At the same time, it was an event where finally there's something out there for other grieving moms to come to and to celebrate their babies. We made sure not only was it a walk to raise money or whatnot, but if you had a loss, whether you were going to attend or not, you could register your baby for their name to be read aloud at our event. And I think we started with maybe like 18 or 20 names, and we had over 150 by the time we finished. And every year we carried that name over. And we had a ceremony at the beginning of the walk where we read every single one of those names. Some of them were unknown. Some of these were miscarriages. Some of them were babies who were 3 or 4 years old and everything in between. And so we would read the name and it depended on the year, whether we'd put a rose in a bucket or we had ornaments that we hung on trees that was for each one of those babies. And even my own grandmother, 50 years prior, had a loss. One of her twin babies had died during delivery, and she had never, ever. Because back then, I mean, I thought it was bad for my time. Back then, you didn't even get to meet your baby. You didn't even get to, like, I was there with him when he passed. I held him. I loved him. I stayed with him for as long as I wanted. My grandmother had nothing. Nothing, nothing. There's stories of women during that time going out and like taking a watermelon that is 8-pound watermelon and just holding on to that to understand what it would felt like to hold their babies. And so we had people even that late, even that long coming to our event to celebrate their baby, to finally be able to say their name and to hear it said out loud was so powerful. So we had people from all over. I mean, and if people were there and they had their baby's name read, they kept an eye on that rose. They kept an eye on that ornament, whatever it might be. And they knew exactly where it was, and they would go up and they would grab it and take it home with them just to have that connection. And so we did this event for 8 years, and it was one of the most rewarding times. We always still come back to it and be like, gosh, if we had just kept doing it, but there comes a point where you had to move on. You had to move on and do something. And I struggled with that at first, right? Because here I was honoring my son. And how else was I going to honor him if I wasn't doing it this way and helping mothers who had been through something similar to me? How could I continue doing anything? And I remember sitting in a summer cottage with a friend of mine, my husband and I, and a different friend, the person who owned the cottage. She had just had a divorce. She was a single mom and she was going through breast cancer. And she had bought this house with this cottage so that she could renovate this cottage and use it as extra income. Well, here she is. She's going through chemo treatments and whatnot. And so my husband, he's a builder. We were like, let's see what we can do. Let's be the catalyst to get the community together and try to have this renovation done for her so she doesn't have to think about it. And I was sitting on the floor painting with a friend in this cottage. And it was at the same time that we were deciding that we were going to stop the Angels Walk for Wishes. And I said to her, I was like, but man, I just feel so guilty. And she's like, why? And she's like, because I want to honor Sawyer. I want to help other moms. She's like, you are. Like, why can't you do this? Why does it have to be that? Why can't you do, or not just this, but anything? Why can't you just do anything to honor moms or other women? And so that was the first of kind of the domino effect of helping other women through whatever it is they're going in life.
To your point about that guilt, or sometimes it's the challenge of letting go. This is a universal challenge that we have for change.
Yeah.
Because we create an identity, with ourselves and what we're doing and what's happening. And we also create inherent, often self-imposed obligations.
Yeah.
To continue. And we think of things in terms of being loyal and not quitting. I mean, there are so many things wrapped up in even the most beautiful thing that you're doing that you've loved to do. And I'm sure, especially in the very beginning, you were there fully. There was really no question. But as we grow and as we change, as we grieve, your life continued on, right?
Yeah.
So with that, what you're talking about and what this conversation, this like next aha, if you will, really describes is how when we pause for a moment on the thing we're doing and we dig deeper into the purpose of it, that gives us the freedom to change things up intentionally and to innovate and to, release maybe an obligation that was there that might even take away from the experience, right? You never would want to be in a position where you were resenting doing it.
Absolutely. It was, it was a one-time event, but it was definitely a year-round endeavor, right? And so we all had growing families. And so, yeah, you're starting to feel like we're maybe taking from our other children too, right? And that was hard. We didn't want to be doing that. We wanted to be able to be present for those guys as well. But you're absolutely right in that digging down and understand why am I doing this was a huge factor. There wasn't a quick switch where I was like, I get it. I mean, certainly sitting on that floor painting in that cottage was the first of me going, oh, okay, I could do this. At the same time that all of that was happening, that we were making this switch with Angels Walk, I was still designing. I was still a designer. I was doing a lot of corporate design. And I was starting to realize I did not want to do that. Corporate design is very top heavy in the sense like they don't care really what I'm doing, right? But they pay the bills. So, hey, but you weren't really seeing an impact directly on what it is you were doing because it was for big corporations. So I realized I really wanted to work with smaller businesses, but I still was struggling. I was in this in between stage of like working with corporate, working with small business. And that's when Naughty Good came along. So Naughty Good is the chocolate company. And who goes from branding to chocolate? Like it is just out there.
You do, Lindsay. You do.
Right. So we had this one-time event that we do in our town called the Christmas in Stratford. So what it is that local artisans will open up their homes. It's been going on for like 30 plus years during the holiday season. One weekend during the holiday season, shoppers get a map and they can stop at all these. They drive to all these different homes and there's hot cocoa and cider being served and you can go in, you can shop, all the artists, all the makers and what they make. And we bring in other makers from out of town too. So it's really an awesome event. And so I've always done something. And this particular year, I'd been making energy balls for my family. And so I'm making these energy bites and they loved them. And so I thought, well, if I make these energy bites for this Christmas in Stratford, that'd be kind of cool. And so I mentioned it to a friend of mine who's my neighbor, and she was like, oh, I'd do that with you. Perfect. Awesome. This is back in April. This is where the fun part comes in because I'm a designer. We don't put them in a plastic bag and call it a day. Like there had to be a complete packaging. There had to be like the complete experience, right? And so the whole brand was born. But anyways, the whole premise behind Naughty Good Bites is that it's a really good, healthy chocolate treat. But at the same time, we always said we were bigger than a bite. And what we did was we named our bites named after female attributes. So it might be mocha was mochivate or is mochivate. Peanut butter is passionate. So they're all these play on words. And people would order our bites maybe based on and send them to somebody based on the flavors or the flavor personalities that we named them. And we would have people across it was all about lifting up and celebrating other females and using our chocolate as a way to do that. And so it was a really cool, there's still a way that I can make that impact. I mean, I'm not kidding you. People would get our chocolate. They'd read our message, our mission statement, and they'd just be in tears because it was so uplifting for them. And it was just a box of chocolates.
It's never just chocolate. Let's be clear here. But yeah, I love that. And I love that. That's a great example of, well, that looks nothing like where I started in this process. And isn't that a wonderful thing to celebrate? And with that in mind, I would love to, as we start to wrap up this conversation, I guess, I mean, this is sort of a looking at it retrospectively, and some of it's kind of like, maybe in theory, taking these actions, right? Doing these things, going with the intent to give back and exploring the different iterations of what that might be. What do you feel like that has done for your grief process?
It's given my grief an outlet, right? And it's given me purpose. Like I know every choice I make now, everything that I do, and I think I said this to you before, is when I arrive and I see him again, so he can say, damn, I'm proud of you. That is the goal for me, to lift up as many people as I can through our story and giving it legs, giving it purpose, giving it meaning. It's just what's kept me going and everything, Gosh, even to see my daughter now, I think about how much she was the only one that ever met him because we have two other children as well, but they were born afterwards. But even her, she's about to go off to college and she's not sure what she wants to do, but everything goes back to him. Everything, I want to do this because I want to help somebody like my brother. I want to do this because, and there's so many ways. And I just love that our story has been able to even has impacted my daughter to think like that, but also other people to think like that and think of how can we truly make our mark, and leave our mark and truly make an impact. A little pebble can create a ripple effect, It doesn't have to be a giant wave or a giant tsunami. We all have that in us. And that, I think if I don't know if you've ever heard this before, you can either choose to live or exist. And I read that shortly after Sawyer died. And I just thought, I can sit here and exist, or I can get up and live. And one thing that his doctor did say to me, he goes, when you wake up every day, Lindsay, I need you to ask yourself, what would he want you to do? And he would not want me to just exist. He'd be like, Mom, get out there and live. So that's what I do.
Uh, you just you just wrapped this up so beautifully, Lindsay. Yes, you chose to live, and you talk about a ripple effect. Your ripple effect brought you to this conversation today.
Yeah.
And it continues to do that. So I think when I would ask what the takeaway is for today, like what we can do next, it's find that one small thing, right? And trust the ripple effect and choose to live.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Beautiful. Okay. Now we have definitely had a few beautiful laughs within because we are choosing to live and we are choosing joy, but we're going to have a few more laughs and a little bit more inspiration in the rapid wrap up. But before we do, please remind us where we can find you online if we'd like to connect.
Yeah, you can find me online. You can go over to Instagram or Facebook, probably through my business. Facebook, my Lindsay Taylor. But Instagram, my business is Tailored Image, and it's tailored.image over there. Or on Facebook, it's Tailored Image NH.
Okay, and we'll make sure to have those in the show notes. So just fill in the blank. A song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance is?
Let's see. Speaking of my dad earlier, I know this is supposed to be rapid, but any song that would get me on a dance floor, and he's usually my dance partner, but the one and only would be AC/DC's You Shook Me All Night Long, all day long. You get that playing on the dance floor at a wedding and I'm there.
I will happily add that to the Positively Living Podcast Spotify dance playlist for sure.
Perfect.
Now, how about, you did mention one, but if there's another, a quote or mantra that inspires me that I love to share?
I share it with my family, share it with myself, but and it's cliche, but flip that script. Like, flip the script. And I do that often. If something's not going my way, I just try to flip it.
Love that. Okay, how about a resource? It could be a book, an app, really anything that has made my life better.
All right, I'm a mom. Life 360 is one of the best apps for me to be able to be for peace of mind. All right, I know where my kid is. She's where she says she's going to be. We're good. Although there's been a couple times she's been stuck out in a cornfield and I'm like, whoa, what's happening? Update app. She's not in a cornfield. But yeah, so Life 360, I would say that, or even like just our calendar app, and it keeps as busy as we are, that we can just be, I know it sounds like nothing exciting. There's no aha, but man, that calendar app keeps us all on the same page. It's shared with everybody in the family and we're all on the same page.
Sometimes the aha is that the simplest things can be the best solutions.
Yes.
That's why we have this as part of the conversation. Okay, now last, but definitely not least, what are you grateful for today, Lindsay?
I'm grateful that we have sunshine today, and I'm just really, gosh, I don't want to be cliche, but I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful that I get to share this story and that I have these opportunities. So there's so much to be grateful for. I don't think I can pinpoint anything.
That's fair. You're allowed to say all of it.
Yeah. All of the above.
Exactly. Well, speaking of all of the above, I am so grateful for you. I'm grateful to have met you, that you're willing to share your story. I'm grateful for Sawyer.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I want to thank you for shining your light so beautifully in this world and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.